They're just checking the mic to see if people online can hear. Hello to everybody online. We want to make sure that you can hear. So if you can't, give us a shout because we have a person here that's monitoring that. First of all, I'm going to say hello to everybody in the room. Thank you for coming. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry it's not under better circumstances. My name is Pat McNicholas. My firm is McNicholas and McNicholas, and we're here at the invitation of Kelsey, who's local. So why don't you talk about yourself and your firm? Nice to meet you. Carrie, Pat McNicholas, and Diana, I met you, and you I know.
Here this week.
You want to do the intro?
Yeah.
Please. I think that.
There we go. Okay, well, thank you for coming. Ernesto knows this, but my name's Kelsey Szamet. My law firm is Kingsley Szamet. My partner, Eric Kingsley, is here. I'll get to our longstanding relationship with Pat in a minute, but I'm a lifelong Altadenan. My mom is actually sitting here in the audience, Diana. My parents first moved to Altadena in the 1970s. And as the family continued to grow and expand, bought a fixer-upper in 1980 on Brayburn Road near the golf course. My dad lived there until 2017. And then in 2018, my husband and daughters and I moved back into the house. So where we are located is kind of really where the fire started to just devastate homes, unfortunately. We are, our side of the block, the homes are standing, and across the block, the homes are not standing, kind of going all the way up into the foothills and also west of us. There's a certain amount of lack of understanding of how our house is still standing, you know, which homes are and which homes aren't. There was a big fire in the front yard next to us, and a neighbor was able to get that out at around 11 o'clock at night. And, you know, the rest of it is who knows. We all saw that the way the embers were flying. So I'm in the same difficult insurance process that we're all starting to navigate and understand what is going to be available to us in terms of realistic timelines to clean Altadena, right? And to start to work through the debris, the toxic chemicals in homes that exploded, the propane tanks. Someone said to me the other day, the Tesla cars that melted in people's driveways. And I hadn't even thought of that, you know, and that's now all just sitting exposed. So we're in a lot of uncertainty, and it's hard to know what to do next in terms of the lack of information and guidance that I feel like we're getting publicly from the government. Pat and I were just talking about, can my insurance company try to make us move home in 2 months or 3 months when we don't feel that it's safe to bring our children home? And what do you do in that situation? So we're muddling through is the honest answer. And we're trying to make the best. My husband and I were both saying in the middle of the night, we're trying to make the best decisions we can in with a lack of good options and good information. And it feels like there's risk behind these decisions that we're making to try to put our families first, right? And we rushed out and looked at a townhouse last night and tried to get our application in, and now we're waiting. You know, we'll see. Who knows? There's probably 10 other people who need that house too. So the reason that you guys are here today is because we're all in this together and we have to take care of each other. I've been on the phone nonstop and meeting people for coffee nonstop since January 8th. And I have met the most intelligent, warm, sophisticated, loving Altadenans that I already knew were my neighbors, but had never been able to sit down and talk to. And it is amazing. We have each other to turn to and take care of each other. It's going to be a long and confusing and painful road forward, but I know we can do it. I called my partner, Eric, on Wednesday after the fires, bawling, right? I think I was charging my car and I was bawling. And I said, we're going after whoever did this. And he said, what do you mean? And I had slept the night before at the Residence Inn with my daughters, and we went down for breakfast. We're having our oatmeal and our powdered eggs. And you knew immediately who had evacuated, right? We're all just ghosts walking around in this hotel with shock on our faces. And I just started chatting with some people. My girls are bubbly, and they were all neighbors. And one woman sitting next to me said, I saw it start and I have the photos. I said, what do you mean? And she took out her cell phone and had these 6 images, and you could just see the fire under the tower. And she had a video. And I thought, oh my gosh, I was obviously grief-stricken, but also angry. And I called Eric and I said, make the call. And he said, okay, and I knew what he meant. And he called Pat immediately, and said, Pat, we got these, photos. We gotta go after who did this. And we've known Pat and his brother Matt for a long time. Matt and Eric went to law school together, and we've prosecuted employment class actions with them going back 15, 20 years on behalf of farm workers in the Central Valley. So we trust them. We know that they know what they're doing. And the team that's now working together on behalf of the Altadena community to go after the wrongdoer, I think there's just a lot of power there. There's a lot of care there. I think there's access to me as someone who's in it and standing there next to you and wondering the same questions about ash and smoke and soot and what's safe and what's not safe. And, even once debris is cleared, is the soil going to be safe to rebuild on? We all have these questions. So, I'm a text away or a phone call away, as Ernesto knows. But then we also have this deep bench with Pat and Becker Law Group and Singleton Schreiber. So I'm going to let Pat speak to that a little bit and then sit right here, and we'll open it up to questions after that from you guys and anyone on Zoom.
Thank you, Kelsey. So first of all, again, welcome. Thank you for having me. I'm truly sorry it's not under better circumstances. So my firm, McNicholas & McNicholas, is doing this litigation with Singleton, Schreiber, and the Becker Law Group. And we're also partnering with Kelsey and with Eric. And the Becker Law Group is also in Pasadena. It's also local. Kelsey and Eric are also local. Unfortunately, Kelsey lost her family home. And I can tell you at this point in time, we represent about 15,000 people, 15,000 statewide, for their losses from wildfire. And one of the important lessons we have learned is that you have to be very local. So we're really proud to be with you, and we're thankful. Why do you have to be local? Because there's so much local knowledge that you all need. Like how to get your living circumstances squared away at this point in time. I know Kelsey was just telling me it's a grind. That's one of the most important things you can do. So we're going to go through this. I'm going to try and keep it as short as possible. The big picture is the purpose of this lawsuit, and we have a high degree of confidence we're going to be successful. Our experts have already been up to the area in and around the tower. They've done their analysis. We have the investigation. We're confident that Southern California Edison started the fire. People always want to know that. We're also confident they have the money to pay, that they have the money to satisfy each and every person's damages in this case. So the purpose of the case against Edison, the utility that caused the fire, is to bridge the gap between your insurance and your actual damages. Your insurance is your first avenue of recovery. It's your cornerstone. You want to maximize that. And I'll answer any questions you have about that. So yes, we can help you with your insurance. Yes, we can help you with your ALE, with your personal property. If you happen to have a rebuild, we can help you with that. So yes, we are here to help you with that because it relates to the lawsuit. So with respect to the lawsuit, let's assume, and I'm just going to use round numbers for ease of reference, that you have an actual loss of $1 million, an actual loss for your structure, for your personal property, for your alternative living expenses, for your vegetation, all those sorts of things, which are calculable economic losses. And it's $1 million. We know based on experience, and there's different variables, that you are going to be about 50% underinsured. 50%. So if your actual loss is $1 million, you likely have about $500,000 in insurance. The purpose of this lawsuit is to make up that difference so that you are made whole. We call that restorative justice. So one of my other goals in having these town halls, it's obviously informational. There's people online, and we encourage people to actually come in because it's a community event. And you can see each other, you can talk to each other, you can support each other. And it's really important that you lean on each other, family, friends, each other, not only for information, but also for emotional and psychological support. So forgive me for one moment because I'm going to tell you a story. And there's a purpose to this story. So there's a little girl walking along the beach. It's early morning. The sun is just coming up. And as she walks down the beach, she can see that there's debris on the beach. And she notices the sun continues to rise, that the tide has receded. And what they're littering the beach with is starfish. So as she's walking down the beach, she begins picking up the stars and throwing them in the water one by one as she crosses paths with them. About 20 or so yards away is an old man who appears to be a little bit grumpy and a little bit bitter. So as she approaches him, she throws another starfish and he walks over and says, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, I'm throwing the stars in the water because if I don't, as the sun comes up and the tide has receded, they're all going to die." And he looks at the little girl and says, "You can't make a difference. There's thousands of them." She walks up closer, picks up another starfish, and throws it in the water. She looks up at the grumpy, somewhat bitter old man and says, "Makes a difference to that one." And I love that story because in this context, it means a lot of things, but especially it's a message of hope. And we're living in a time countrywide, and particularly with the devastation of these fires, where there's a lot of anger, which is very much justified and appropriate. But we need to move from anger to hope and to action, because no good is going to come from just anger. We didn't get to the moon on anger. We didn't have vaccines that cured polio based on anger. We need bridge builders right now. We need people who can build homes. We need people who can build roads, not bomb throwers. So what I want to do is appeal to each and every one of you, to your inner star thrower, with respect to each other. Everybody needs hope, and hope always needs a messenger, and all of you are that. And this lawsuit is also going to be a message of hope, because the goal of the lawsuit is restorative justice, to restore you to where you were before the fires happened. So you have your insurance. We're here to help. We're here to help with the lawsuit, where you can recover everything that the insurance didn't pay for. We have done this a lot of times in the last, well, since 2017. You know, there have been huge fires, disastrous fires. And again, our group, my firm is probably representing right now about 15,000 people. Our group is probably between 20 and 25,000 people. So we can get this done. It's important for you to know also that there's no risk to you at all in the lawsuit. zero. You don't have to pay any cost. You pay attorney's fees at the end. So that's number one. There's no downside to you doing this. There's only upside. How does the relationship work? A lot of people get confused because they think it's a class action. Every one of these town halls, is this a class action? Just one of those cases where the lawyers get millions, and we get a cup of coffee and a donut. No, that is not this case. This case is a mass action. Each and every one of you have your own individual case. So we work with you, with this team, individually. You have a contract with us. It's called a retainer. So what does our contract say? We cover all the costs. At the end, if we're successful, and we believe we will be, we take 25% of the recovery. Keep in mind that no attorney should ever take any of your insurance money. That's yours, 100%, and that's the foundation of your financial recovery. So for example, if you recovered $1 million, your fees would be, this is separate from your insurance, $250,000. The next question is, okay, well, do we have to pay the cost back at the end? Some of them you do. And there's two types of costs. One is what are known as common costs to everybody. And there's going to be in our group thousands and thousands of people. The common costs are generally to prove liability. Earlier in our conversation, I informed you that we had experts that actually have been up to the tower and have begun their investigation. So we as a group pay for those experts. And when it gets spread over everybody, it becomes a very small amount, maybe in the hundreds of dollars or maybe in the low thousands of dollars. For those of you who have lost a home, of other losses that we need to hire an expert individually for you, you could have other costs. So for example, if you unfortunately lost your home, we have rebuild experts. The rebuild experts will say, this house in terms of today's dollar will cost $1.2 million to rebuild. We have to have a report for that. So that expert normally charges us probably $750 to, maybe $1,200, depending. So that would be a cost in your case. The bottom line is if you had a recovery of about $1 million, your costs that are attributable to you alone are probably going to be less than $10,000. So you'd pay the $250 minus the 10, the rest would be yours. You would put in your pocket $740,000. And that makes up for the gap between what your insurance company didn't pay and your actual loss. So let me ask, before I ramble on too long, do we have any questions online about anything? Or does anybody have any questions here present?
I had a good question to address about whether people have to pay taxes, for example, on that $740,000 number we're using in our example.
Okay, the question is, do we have to pay taxes on the recovery? The disclaimer is, I'm not a tax lawyer, but I can tell you from experience, it's been a hot issue. They just passed legislation, federal government, they passed legislation in the state of California so that your wildfire recovery is not taxed. Now, be that as it may, there still could be certain circumstances where it is. For example, if you have a business loss, and that means you lost money, profit, you would have had to pay taxes on that anyways. You would have had to pay taxes, so you're still going to have to pay taxes. But as far as your emotional distress, you shouldn't have to. As far as your rebuilding, you shouldn't have to. Those things are to make you whole. In the end, we always tell people, talk to your individual accountant, somebody who does this day in and day out. Things change, laws change, rules change, but generally, as I described it, is our experience with that. Another question that comes up is the ALE, because that is such a hot issue right now. Kelsey was telling me that if she's looking for a place to live and price gouging is huge, we all know that the lead prosecutor for the county has said he's going to go after people that price gouge. Unfortunately, there are certain instances where they can still do it. but you are entitled under your insurance, under your ALE, alternative living expense, to find another place and your insurance company will pay for it. What's really important with your alternative living expense is that you understand how much it is and understand that whatever they say it is, the cap of it, that's not going up. The time within which you can take advantage of that money can and usually is extended, okay? But the total amount is not going up. So here's the rub. You have to be really careful at this point in time, and I want to make sure that people online understand that you have to be really careful that you're doing the math. So people want to know how long before I can rebuild. Hard to say. This fire is the complex of fires. It's a game changer. It's historic. Never seen anything like that. So we're in uncharted waters. Be that as it may, I will say based on my experience, the lawsuit will take 24 to 36 months. And in the Woolsey fire, for example, where my house partially burned down, and by the way, I apologize for the casual close, I'm still evacuated. So we had our gas turned on, our electricity pole turned on.
That's good.
But usually I try and look like a lawyer, so apologies. No disrespect intended. You know, on my particular street, people were building within about 14 months. We lost about a third of the homes on my street. Some people actually finished their rebuild within 2 years. There are some people who still haven't rebuilt. I don't know why. I think it's probably their own personal decision. But for purposes of planning, I would say for you to actually be able to move in, 3 to 4 years. The outlier we're hoping is going to be 5 years. And that's why you have to pay attention to the math on your alternative living expenses. The other area that people have a tremendous amount of questions about is the personal property. So personal property is where the insurance companies like to grind you because nobody wants to go back and itemize everything they're lost. So number one, you're not required to. That's number one. Number two, most people don't have that because it's all burned up. So what are the rules with respect to that? The rules are they have to write you a check right now. And I'm going to get fact checked because there's a person in the back of the room who works at McNicholas and McNicholas that does this every day and has done it every day for the last 4 years, presenting demand packages. 30% people can get on their personal property just by asking for it, correct? Event of a total loss, yeah. Okay, so the rule is in event of a total loss with respect to your personal property, no questions asked, you get 30%. I'll tell you based on my experience, it can go up to 50% and up to 2/3. But then once you get into the higher percentages, the insurance companies will say, we'll write you the check, no questions asked, 2/3, for example, but that's going to be it. All right, so here's what then you have to decide. You have to decide you want to go for the extra money, in which case they are going to grind you a little bit. And I will say, based on experience, that is one of the single most difficult aspects of the case for the clients because you have to document in excruciating detail your life and how your history was burned up. So you're going to have to make a personal choice. Okay, question online, go ahead.
Where we have standing but an uninhabitable house. Could you go a bit more into the difference between the lawsuit you are working on versus a class action?
Okay, so again, not a class action. A class action is also what's known as a representative action. It's called a representative action because one or two people represent an entire class of people. In this case, it's a mass action, not a class action, because every case stands alone on its own merit. And we have an individual contract retainer with each and every person that is our client. So right now we have, separate and apart from this fire, about 15,000 separate retainers. So why that's different is because That requires us to get all of your individual information. I'm going to talk about that in a bit. In fact, I might let Brandon Castor, because he's been doing it for 4 years, how we gain your information, we store it, then we write a narrative and present a demand package for resolution. I think for the specific question online was actually what Kelsey was talking to me about earlier, is when you have a partial burn down, or even not a burn down, but a house which is still standing inside the burn scar. And again, this happened to me because, I had probably about a third of the houses on my street burned down. So you're essentially in a toxic construction zone. With respect to your ALE, they can't demand that you move back in. You are not required to move into a dangerous situation. So the next question, Kelsey asked me this, is do we have attorneys that can help with that issue? The answer is yes. We go with outside attorneys that we have a relationship with that specialize in insurance law and representing consumers against insurance companies. But the short answer is do what's in the interest of your family and don't let your insurance company leverage you. If they try to, we can help you. Yes, we have a question in the room.
But can you explain why advantageous, or why a class action wouldn't make sense for this type of situation, and why the approach you're talking about wouldn't make sense?
Excellent question. So why does this approach make sense as opposed to a class action? So first of all, a class action, everybody is situated the same. Essentially, everybody has the exact same case. That's why one or two people can represent the whole class. That's not possible in this case because everybody's house is different. That's why when you go to buy a house, you have a real estate agent, everyone's got a different price. It's a different market. Your emotional distress is going to be different. Some people got sick, some people got hurt, some people were beelining through flames. Every situation is different. Some people I've talked to were, helping their elderly parents get out of a care home. So it does not lend itself to a class action. And the damages in this case are going to be significantly larger than a class action. You don't have class action where there's millions of damages in one case. You just don't. So further to your point, we have a whole team of people. We have a couple hundred people that will be working on this case alone. You'll have a case manager. Your case manager will reach out to you. Your case manager will work with you to obtain what we know to be the necessary information to present at the end a demand package. So the demand package will include all your economic information, what your rebuild's going to cost, what your other structures are going to cost, your out structures, your landscape, your hardscape, what your ALE was, what your personal property is. And then we also go into your emotional distress claim. And I know that's kind of a generic term, which really does not do justice to what everybody has to go through. But suffice it to say that in these circumstances, it can be really significant. So we take all that information and we store it in a way that's retrievable. And it's particular to each and every person. And you're going to have a case manager. So if you have a question, you can call. It's our goal to get back to you within 24 hours with any question you have. It's also in our interest. And as long as we're on this topic, people want to know, what is the commitment that each client is going to have in terms of time with respect to this lawsuit. And our best estimate, again, based on experience, is about 2 to 3 hours. That will be interfacing with our office. Sometimes it'll be on the phone. Sometimes it'll be through your computer. Sometimes it'll just be on your phone digitally. Some people like to meet in person, which is like we continue to do these town halls. So that's why we do that. We're geared to do it. We've been doing this for a long time. So it's important that you know it is not a class action. It's a mass action. Does that help? Okay. Yes, Diana.
I went to your other town hall,
And you said that if people live in the mandatory evacuation zone, that their insurance has to pay for remediation, meaning like get Surf Pro in and they clean everything and clean out your filters and the soft furniture, et cetera. I'm in Pasadena. I wasn't in the mandatory evacuation zone, but my house needs to have that kind of remediation. It's an older house and, you know, it's like little windows that don't close all the way, et cetera. Does insurance have to pay for that?
Okay, so the question for everybody online, it's with respect to remediation, people in the mandatory evacuation zone, people not in the mandatory evacuation zone, and whether the insurance company has to pay for the non-mandatory evac. So let me answer that globally. Obviously, if you're in the mandatory zone, your insurance company is going to pay for remediation. Diana mentioned ServPro. Actually, did use ServPro. They were expensive as hell, but they did a really good job. The house looked better after than before, actually. So that was a good thing in my insurance company. It was State Farm, and they did cover it. Once you get out of the mandatory, that's going to be a conversation with your insurance company. And then as it relates to the lawsuit, that's a discussion we have when we're negotiating cases. So sometimes people are outside the mandatory evacuation zone. That's what they call, we received a warning. Sometimes a lot of that comes down to wind modeling, and we have wind modeling experts and other evidence that you would have to support your claim that, hey, you know, I have smoke and I have ash damage and I've got to get cleaned up. So if you're a non-mandatory evac, with respect to your insurance, do they have to pay? Not necessarily, but maybe you have to have that conversation. Same thing with the lawsuit. Does the Southern California Edison have to pay? We negotiate that. And this is a good opportunity to let everybody know what the actual categories are to participate in this lawsuit. I mean, if you live 50 miles away, you're not going to be part of this lawsuit. If you have a home that unfortunately burned down, that's called a total burn down, yes, obviously you're going to be in this lawsuit. You could also have a partial burn down. That was my situation in the Woolsey fire. Yes, you can be part of the lawsuit. Then you could have just smoke and ash. There's going to be people that have smoke and ash that live in the burn scar, other houses lost on their street. They definitely have a case. Then there's going to be a whole category of cases where it's really mandatory evac and smoke and ash. Those people also have cases. When you get outside the mandatory evacs, and Diana, into your example, where you received a warning, so evac and you have some smoke and ash damage, that again is going to be a negotiated situation. Are there any questions about that online? Yes, Erica.
Displaced. The house I lived in maybe was burned but if I didn't own it or I didn't have a tenant, and so just my personal belongings were lost, and then, you know, I just don't have a place to live in.
Okay, so I'll expand the scope. Can renters be a part of this case? The answer to that is absolutely. You won't have a claim for a structural burn down, but you would have all the other claims with emotional distress. If your personal property, your car is damaged by smoke and ash, or otherwise you have that claim also. You just don't have the same claim that an actual property owner would have, but you definitely have a claim. And we've represented, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of renters in the past, for sure, 100%.
In AOB that your insurance didn't cover.
Correct, yes. So the question was, with respect to ALE, alternative living expenses, the lawsuit, yes, will recover that gap. And some people don't have renter's insurance, and some people don't even have homeowner's insurance because they got canceled. So the lawsuit will recover the loss 100%, 100%, for sure. Any other questions about anything so far? I did want to mention just a little bit more about insurance. So, because we get so many questions, not trying to put you to sleep here, but you have what are known as first party rights against your insurance company. They have fiduciary duties to you. What does that mean? They have a heightened responsibility. And the law is pretty clear. They cannot treat you unfairly. If they do, they can be sued for breach of contract and in tort for the emotional distress they cause you. So that does come up in our cases, and we work with other attorneys. When we get a little farther down the line, we will bring attorneys who specialize in what we call bad faith law to deal with certain situations where people feel like they are not being given a good shake. Okay, so if there's no other questions online, Todd, any questions? Brandon, can you come forward? So this is Brandon Castor from our offices, McNicholas and McNicholas. He runs the day-to-day, and I want him to talk about, since he does this at the granular level, has been doing it for 4 years, just what goes on in your department and how you manage and handle these cases.
Sure. So the good news is anyone who participates in this litigation, the requirement for you to interact with me or our team is relatively minimal over the course of time. I don't know if you said, these litigations do take time, right? We say 24 to 36 months. It doesn't mean that is that amount of time before the first person sees a settlement, but it sort of encompasses a point in time where the majority of people will either have settled or be in a settlement process. Through that time, we will probably speak a lot, but what I actually need to build out your case is, 2 to 3 hours of your time. Beyond that, it's usually going to be, you'll probably want to speak to us to get an update, or we will present you one, and we're always available for that. But as far as requesting things from you, so to Pat's point, so what we need to know about your situation is obviously your owner-renter status. If you owned, documents showing that ownership, proof of residency, or sorry, a deed to your home. If you're an owner, proof of residency if you're a renter. If you don't have those things, if they were lost in the fire, we can help you get them, right? We'll request them for the county recorder's office. Content losses. This is generally the hardest or most painful part for people because it's time consuming. It can be re-traumatizing to try to go through and make a list of the things you lost. For those with insurance, the good news is you likely will have already done a part of this for your insurance company. They'll ask you above that initial offer to likely itemize to get the additional money for them up to your policy limits. So anything you do for your insurance company, we can reutilize. And if you stop short because you already hit your policy limits, then we can talk about how to fill in those gaps, right? But you'll have done the bulk of the work. Of course, then getting a narrative about your experience, right? Where you were when you found out about the fire. Did you have to evacuate, or were you not home at the time? And then the after effects, right? What was your displacement like? How long were you displaced? And all the emotional traumas that go along with that. And obviously, you're not going to know those all today. That's why that part is a bit of a process. If I asked you those questions today, you could only tell me up to today. But with emotional trauma, it can take days, weeks, months, even years to really reveal itself as to how you actually feel. So we will continue to supplement that if you feel there are changes from the time you first told us your story. But that can happen all in a conversation, right? Usually the conversation to gather that information is somewhere between 45 minutes and say an hour and a half total. We could break it up into different things. And as far as like the narrative, we ask you either if you want to write one, you're absolutely able to. Or for a lot of people, it's easier for you to verbally tell it to myself or one of our team members, and we will turn it into a narrative. So you don't have to sit and dwell on every single detail and relive the experience. It's sometimes easier to just get it out in one sitting. And then we take all of that and we put it together in the demand package. As far as other supporting documents for, say, inventory list, we put the inventory. If you have photographs, obviously helpful, not necessary. Some people say, well, I don't have my photographs. Starting with just looking through your phone, right? Maybe there was a family get together, right? Or family members they were at your home for, a birthday, a holiday, something. And it's just a picture of your living room, right? Just something to show what you lost, what your house looked like, some of the content. Of course, if you are someone that like video logged the entirety of your house for insurance purposes, absolutely, that would be helpful to have. But again, not a requirement. So don't let it sort of bog you down or get too caught up on, how am I going to prove this, right? That's not going to be the issue. It is assumed if your house was lost that you had furniture, clothing, electronics, all those things within it. And if you don't have, we don't usually keep receipts. Like I know I don't have receipts for, I don't think, anything in my life, besides maybe if I have a credit card statement that I can dig up. But, business losses, if you had those, if they existed at the property, it's going to be the same thing, right? If you have any documentation that you can think of, you just slowly start putting it together, right? If you file taxes, eventually, if you don't have them, we can request those. But as far as intake time, it's really not that burdensome on a time scale. Obviously, the content can be burdensome to have to talk about. Beyond that, we keep you apprised, right? Either with email outreach or anytime you want to speak to us, you call and, within 24 hours, 48 in the worst case scenario, you're going to get a call back if you don't speak to someone on that first day. And we can, bring you up to speed what's going on in litigation, your exact case, and if there's anything outstanding that we need from you.
Can you talk about public adjusters, whether people could use and not use
Yes.
them?
So the question is, do you need or should you hire a public adjuster? Because this gets asked a lot. The answer, my honest answer is, I don't think anyone needs a public adjuster day one. Public adjusters can offer assistance, especially with, say, content losses, to help you catalog all your losses and value them for purposes of getting additional funds from your insurance company. I would say if you do decide that it is worth their fee to save yourself the time and the mental anguish, there's no wrong answer to that. It is worth considering, though, if your insurance company is already going to give you 30%, say in a total loss, that you try to negotiate with your public adjuster that they don't take a percentage on what you were entitled to without them doing any work. When it comes to, say, the cover, if they're helping you go after coverage A, which is your structural dwelling loss, or even coverage B, which is your your auxiliary dwellings or auxiliary structures, I should say, it might be worth mentioning to us, if you've already signed up with us, what they're going to do, because they might go get reports, expert opinions that could be helpful for your insurance. But we want to make sure that they are of the right quality to work for this lawsuit. So we don't have to then go get another report. And now you've paid the public adjuster and you've also paid us for the same thing. But basically just know, I don't think you need one. I always say to our clients or our potential clients, you are your best first line of defense with your insurance, right? If they tell you no, or that, they don't think that your value is what you say it is, just push back, right? Say that you don't believe they're right. Ask to speak to another adjuster. It's been a few days ago now, but I had a client call and say they had a classic car that was lost in the fire, and their insurance called them and said they wanted to give them $12,000. And they were upset because it was well below. All they did was say no. They went online, they found one comparable, sent it to their adjuster. Very next day, they were offered $38,000, which they told me they thought was overvalued. So it really can be that simple. Now, obviously, there can be horror stories, and that's where Pat spoke about the potential need for a bad faith claim, but it's too early to tell now if that's going to be the case. So just start with advocating for yourself. And if a public adjuster you think is beneficial to save you the time, because everyone has life still going on, right? Every job, family, responsibilities, that obviously doesn't stop. So if you do think it's worth it, then it might be. But if anyone tells you you need it to maximize, I tend to think that that is not true from day one.
Let me address that from just a hyper local level too with Brandon. I've got one. So I think, like Pat was saying, we're in uncharted territory here with the scope of loss in such an urban area. And the number of structures lost and the vicinity that so many people are living to the burn zone, still living in it, or, my house in the burn zone, but not livable. That I'm talking to a lot of folks who feel like, and I was telling Pat this offline, I personally feel like State Farm is going to try to force me to move home in 2 to 3 months. They're going to bring in ServPro, and ServPro is going to give a bid and clean, and ServPro is going to say, well, the inside's clean in 3 months. So, State Farm is going to try to potentially cut off alternative living benefits. This is brewing, and a lot of people are worried about it, rightfully so, my family included. And so this is a circumstance where maybe a public adjuster makes sense. We just don't know yet, and don't need to make that decision today. And maybe it's hard to be patient, and the unknown is oppressive. I physically feel it on my chest and my shoulders. It's oppressive, this unknown, but we've got to let it play out a little bit and see, is State Farm really trying to force us to move home in 2 or 3 months? And in the meantime, A, we don't feel it's safe, and B, we've signed a 12-month lease closer to our children's school or whatever. These are just all factors that are in play, and we're going to have to consider as a household what we feel comfortable with, and work with us, work with your legal team for advice. And there are some circumstances where maybe the adjuster might make sense. The public adjuster might make sense.
Okay, thank you for that. So then everybody wants to know what is the next step. So the next step, again, we need individual retainers from everybody. Online, there's people that we have here that can address any questions you have. You can fill it out online electronically. People in person here, again, people here that can walk you through the retainers. So it would be our pleasure to represent you. I would also encourage you to go to our individual websites. That's Becker Law Group, that's Singleton Schreiber, and my firm McNicholas and McNicholas. I'm 100% confident, we have the experience, we have the money to do this, we have the systems in place to do this. And we enjoy doing it. It's what we do. Firemen say we're dragon slayers. We like to go out and fight the fires. We like to go out and bring, in this case, Southern California Edison to justice. It's what we do when we're looking for restorative justice. Just to close, I would also like to say, I do think this is going to end well. Find your inner star thrower, support your community, support your family, and it's going to get better. We are in uncharted waters, but everything I've heard out of Sacramento, at the county level, at the federal level, that this is finally going to be the game changer. This is going to be the game changer. In Altadena, in the Palisades, there's going to be an opportunity to redo the infrastructure. That's good. What does the infrastructure mean? That means roads. That means they can bury the electric lines. That means they can harden the transmission wires where this happened so it doesn't happen again. In addition, the water delivery systems are completely outdated. They weren't designed to put out wildfires, especially of this magnitude, especially with this much fuel, this many people, and so many houses so close together. They were designed to put out one house on fire. So it's going to be an opportunity. It's going to get better. And it would be our pleasure to represent you. So best of luck. And thank you all for attending in person and online.